기억이 해달라고.
내꺼 다른 여자랑 말도 섞이면 난 내꺼 난 내꺼 새끼도 따라고 해야 해줘요 절대 나 혼자 내버려두지 않기 귀요미 이따기는 귀요미 이따기가면 귀요미 귀요미 말랑이 나도 귀요미 오덕이 오도 귀요미 이따기 오은 귀요미 웃는 팔지마 누가 그래도 내꺼 다른 여자랑
그리고 싶다고 나? 뭔 상관이야?
말도 섞고
엄청 멀다. 기억이 해달라고.
눈 팔지마 누가 그래도 내꺼 다른 여자랑 말도 섞이면 난 내꺼 새끼도 따라고 약속해줘요 절대 나 혼자 내버려두지 않기 귀요미 이따기는 귀요미 이따기 가면 귀요미
ったね。じゃあ次のコーナーだよ。日本のいろいろな人たちの初めましてを見ましょう。
こんにちは。
どうもこんにちは。
はじめまして。バレエプロです。74歳です。
はじめまして。ドイツのようです。71歳です。
はじめまして、阿部です。はじめまして、倉重です。
はじめまして、菅野です。
はじめまして。パパですよ。はじめまして。おーい。
赤ちゃん、可愛かったね。
そうだね。
いろいろな初めましてが来るんだね。はじめまして。
じゃあここで少し休憩。リリンの学校で面白いものを見つけたよ。何か当ててね。これは何？
なんだろう。
自転車置き場。
そっか。上と下に自転車を置くんだ。
狭いけどたくさん起きるね。じゃあ勉強に戻ろう。今度は応用スキット。さきちゃんの友達に初めて会うよ。
ああ、誰かな。
上手に挨拶できるかな。頑張って。
はい。じゃあ、行ってきます。
また教科書忘れたの？
違うよ。藤岡のクラスに留学生来たんだって。
ほら、あそこにいる子。
かわいいじゃん。
お迎えしてあげようか。
紹介するね。隣のクラスの林健太君。私と同じ次すぐなの。
林健太です。
エリンです。
今日は雨ですね。
何それ？そんなこと聞きなさいよ。小学校からずっと一緒なんだけど、本当昔からダメダメなやつなんだよね。
おい、初めて会った人にそういう紹介の仕方はないだろ。エリンちゃん、こいつ怒らせると怖いから気をつけてね。
ケンさ。
新しい友達ができたよ。
よかったね。さあ帰っておいで。
ただいま。
おかえり。さ
Japanese have rites and ceremonies so different from those of all other nations. The things they do are beyond imagining. And it may be truly said that Japan is a world the reverse of Europe.
To the first Westerners in Japan, it was a mysterious world. It was the fabled Isle of Zipangu that Marco Polo had only heard about. The land of riches that Christopher Columbus set out to find. When the Portuguese arrived in Japan in 1543, they encountered a country embroiled in civil war. Out of this chaos, one samurai warrior would emerge. He would create a regime so strong it endured for over 250 years. Witnesses to this world, both Western observers and Japanese, wrote of these changing times. Theirs is a story of flowering culture, of poetic ritual, and of rigid power struggles. It is the saga of opening trade with Europe and then closing its doors to the West. These are the memoirs of Japan's secret empire.
Of the year of the water and the air, there appeared off our western shore a big ship. No one knew whence it had come.
As a Buddhist monk later recounted, samurai guards were quickly dispatched to warn their master. There were strangers on board these ships, unlike anyone the Japanese had ever seen. The local warlord, called a daimyo, summoned these strangers, the first Europeans to ever set foot on Japanese shores. It was the year 1543. When these Portuguese merchants arrived, the daimyo was intrigued by their peculiar, unknown weapons.
The Japanese always liked novel things, new things, a fad, so to speak. And so they were very, very interested in the Europeans.
After he watched the Portuguese shoot down a duck, the daimyo purchased 2 guns and put his swordsmith to work making copies. Then he asked for shooting lessons. These first Europeans, their guns and their religion, would have unforeseeable consequences. In this same year, a boy was born to a daimyo family. He would be known as Tokugawa Ieyasu. His destiny would be to change Japan forever. As an elite member of the samurai class, the boy inherited a world of tradition. A feudal realm of samurai warriors who ruled by birthright and sword. The son of a daimyo lord, Ieyasu would soon have to give up children's games for the politics of war. Ieyasu was still a child, the ruling daimyo demanded that Ieyasu's father send the young boy to him as a hostage, insurance that all orders would be obeyed.
When children were taken as hostages, it did not mean prisoners. This was all part of the political negotiation in which alliances had to be formed, because no one trusted no one else. So there had to be guarantee, and therefore the hostage was released.
As a hostage, the young samurai boy traveled in the style befitting his daimyo rank.
The whole of Japan was involved in wars. Treachery was rampant and nobody trusted his neighbor. They would enter into league with one faction and then desert it for another, as the winds of fortune blew.
João Rodrigues, an eyewitness to these perilous times, was one of the first Portuguese to arrive in Japan. He came as a cabin boy of 15 and would soon become a Jesuit missionary. As Portuguese merchants traversed the oceans in search of new ports for trade, Jesuit missionaries accompanied them, searching for souls to save. The Jesuits were young and dedicated, braving the hardships of the dangerous 2-year voyage to reach Japan, a country which they considered ripe for conversion. They sent home tantalizing reports of an alien world.
Everything is so different and opposite that they are like us in practically nothing. Now, all this would not be surprising if they were like so many barbarians. But what astonishes me is that they behave as very prudent and cultured people in all these matters. This is something which I would not dare to affirm if I had not had so much experience among them.
The missionaries thought that the Japanese were such a remarkable race. Their culture was so developed that it was worthwhile writing back to Europe about the culture which they found, the language the Japanese spoke, and a very complex political system without any influence from Christianity, without any influence from Europe. And so I think this is a thing which one should bear in mind, that this was the first time Europeans dealt with Asians on equal terms and not as conquerors and conquered people.
Their way of writing is very different from ours because they write from the top of the page down to the bottom. I asked a Japanese why they did not write in our way, and he asked me why we did not write in their way. He explained that as a head of a man is at the top and his feet are at the bottom, so too a man should write from top to bottom.
map shows us how the continental Europe looked before the First World War in 1914. We can recognize clearly 5 big players. In the center, the black color shape, Imperial Germany. The brown color shape, multinational Habsburg Austria with Kingdom of Czech, which large German minority. Galicia with Poles and Ukrainians. And multinational Kingdom of Hungary, which large minority of Slovaks, Romanians, Croatians and Germans. The golden color shape, multinational.
World War I was the first in which the action could be seen as it happened. Early cameras were too bulky to record many critical events, but modern graphic techniques now allow these to be recreated, such as the world's first tank-against-tank engagement, the exploits of the war's leading balloon buster, daring Special Forces operation, defending a fortified position against a revolutionary new weapon, or the brutal effectiveness of air power. Modern techniques also allow World War I to be seen in colour as it really happened. This was the war in which many of the weapons which today dominate the battlefield were first developed. The machine gun, the tank, specialized combat aircraft like fighters and strategic bombers, and the craft which revolutionized naval warfare, the submarine and the aircraft carrier. When the war began, everyone expected it to be short and fast-moving. Instead, the power of the machine gun, massive artillery bombardments, and barbed wire led to the nightmare of trench warfare. For the next 3 years on the Western Front, millions of men lived a nightmare existence amid squalor and constant danger from enemy bombardment. They went over the top in futile mass attacks. Only to be mown down in the hundreds of thousands by enemy machine guns. Attempts were made to break the stalemate. One of them was Webcam, manned by the German General Staff. The historic fortress town of Verdun would be assaulted, not to achieve a breakthrough, but simply to bleed the French army to death. The town of Verdun had been a crucial defensive position on France's northeastern border for centuries. Around it was an elaborate and mutually supporting system of fortresses designed to halt any enemy advance. The Germans calculated that the French could not afford to allow the position to be lost. They would pour the elite of their army into what would become an horrific killing ground. The fortresses like that at Douaumont had first been built in the 16th and 17th centuries. Their walls and underground defences had been constantly updated to withstand assault or siege by modern weaponry. They had massive and heavily armoured rotating turrets for heavy artillery. And many machine gun nests. But the reality was that since 1914, the defences had been allowed to crumble, and the forts were severely undermanned. On the 21st of February 1916, after a 9-hour bombardment, the German attack began. After 4 days of savage fighting, the German assault pioneer, Sergeant Eugen Kutzer, managed to get into Duomo. To his astonishment, he wandered entirely alone through a vast concrete labyrinth. He could hear the muffled bangs of Fort Douaumont's 155mm gun. Guided by these, he made his way nervously to the main turret. The French gun crew was so preoccupied that they didn't notice him until he made them prisoner. Kutzer then roamed on. The realization began to dawn on him that the fort was virtually unmanned. In fact, its garrison had been reduced to a mere 56 elderly French guns. Scarcely able to believe his good fortune, Kutzer eventually found the remainder of these in the main dormitory, many still in their beds. He simply locked them in their room and called his men into the fortress. Sergeant Kutzer had single-handedly captured Verdun's most powerful bastion. Despite this disaster, the French held Verdun. Astonishingly, 3/4 of the French army was involved in the fighting during the next 9 months. More than 750,000 men, roughly half of them French and half German, were sacrificed in the bloodbath. By the 4th winter of the war, the Allies were hanging on grimly, desperately waiting for the arrival of millions of fresh American troops to turn the tide. The Germans were equally aware of this danger. Russia's collapse in December 1917 meant that they could bring more than 1 million men west, and General Erich Ludendorff, the commander on the Western Front, was determined to use these to achieve a swift and final victory. Knowing an attack was imminent, the British commander, Field Marshal Douglas Haig, adopted a new defensive system based on depth. There would be a forward zone. Blue line, lightly manned, but with strong points to blunt the initial attack. Then the battle zone, or red line, where the main fighting would take place. And finally, the rear zone, or brown line, where the enemy assault would be held. Ludendorff decided that a new attack method was needed to break these defenses: storm troops. Lightly equipped and fast-moving units of the most battle-hardened men would slip into the enemy's lines under cover of the bombardment. These would use surprise and speed to bypass centers of resistance and break through deep to the enemy's rear. At 4 in the morning of the 21st of March, 1980, 6,000 German guns opened up on the full depth of the British positions with gas and high explosives. Just over 4 hours later, the first wave of stormtroops leapt out of the trenches and raced forward. They slipped through the wire using stick grenades as one of their main weapons. Another was a deadly, belching fire of flamethrowers. The German barrage moved forward 100 meters every 2 to 3 minutes, protecting this human tidal wave. But, in the end, it ran out of impetus, and the last great German offensive fizzled out. During 1960, the British had come up with a completely different, but equally innovative method of breaking the stalemate of the trenches. Deep underground, special teams of miners recruited from the coal fields of Wales and northern England had begun to tunnel under the German lines. It was backbreaking and claustrophobic work, with the ever-present danger of being entombed alive by a collapse. And made worse by the knowledge that the Germans were listening for the sound of digging and sinking counter-tunnels down which raiding parties would tiptoe. Sometimes they would break in on the British miners, and desperate battles in the dark would ensue. Some of the tunnel systems stretched for hundreds of yards underground, with elaborate dead ends and false connections. Once the main tunnels were under the selected sections of the enemy line, they were packed with explosives. Average of 21 tons of amatol per mile. The greatest use of mines came on the 7th of June 1917, at the beginning of the British assault on the Messines White Sheet Ridge near Ypres. A total of 23 mines had been dug under the crucial German position, of which 19 were to be used. The Germans had pulled back from the others. The firing wires were connected up, and the assault troops moved into position in no man's land. After 6 months of preparation, the firing teams checked their watches and prayed a lot. Then, at 3 a.m., the plungers were driven home. And more than 400 tons of explosive ripped 2 miles of the German front apart, killing thousands of defenders. Sadly, the initial breakthrough was not fully exploited. The more long-lasting British attempt to break the trench stalemate was the tank. By mid-1960, armour, caterpillar tracks and the internal combustion engine had been brought together to form the first land ships capable of crossing trenches and supporting infantry. These were either the female, armed only with machine guns, or the male, with 2 6-pounder guns in the side sponsons. These first tanks had a speed of about 4 miles an hour and a crew of 8. The British tanks were first used piecemeal in September 1916 during the Battle of the Somme. They achieved some local successes. But it was not until the Battle of Cambrai in November 1917 when 376 tanks were used, that their true potential was shown. Holes were punched in the German line, and by nightfall more than 5 miles had been gained. But the unreliability of these early tanks meant that the breakthrough could not be followed up. Nevertheless, the Germans were so impressed by the British successes that they urgently developed their own tank, a 33-ton monster with a crew of 18 named the A7V. Armed with a 57mm cannon and 6 machine guns, it was totally underpowered and unwieldy, and could only manage 3 miles an hour. But it was rushed into service to counter the British threat. The first tank-against-tank confrontation soon followed. This came during the Great German Offensive in March 1918, when the storm troops tore through the British lines and penetrated more than 40 miles. The second assault in April kept up the momentum, and the possibility of breaking through to Paris suddenly seemed feasible. On the early morning of the 24th of April, Ludendorff's forward units were less than 10 miles from Amiens, probing towards the village. One and a half miles southwest of the village, a section of British tanks, 1 male and 2 females, was waiting in support of Dalian infantry. As the crews peered through the mist, they saw an extraordinary sight. One of the few operational German A7V was underway. The ironclad monsters ponderously closed the ranks. Inside the tanks, the conditions were appalling. There was no proper suspension, and the unsilenced engines roared and belched fumes. Finally, the leading British tank, the male, opened fire with its 6-pounder gun, but missed. Unscathed, the A7V trundled on, its crew desperately trying to see where the fire was coming from. Finally, they spotted the enemy, halted, and opened fire. No effect at first, but then it began to find its range and struck